And I think when we think about, financial instruments and, these sort of like innovations that are coming up, there's also stuff that has been around for a long time, like the ETF, right? And something that we've been waiting on, from the crypto side is the Bitcoin Spot ETF to find, it's like a unicorn at this point. Like we're waiting for it to come around. What, for those that are listening, what are the implications of the Bitcoin Spot ETF on the crypto markets as a whole, and why is it so important? Why are we all talking about it so often? Whoever wants to jump on that one.
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
Oh, okay. I mean, look, I think that it's a great conversation to have, but once again, to kind of throw up the flag and say, who regulates it? I think you have a really big issue first of saying, well, who's going to regulate this? It's going to be a security, but it's a security that's based on what? It took years for a gold ETF or a natural gas ETF or an oil ETF to poke its head out, which were based on regulated futures. And so I still think we're going to keep trying and pressing forward with a spot Bitcoin ETF, and there are a lot of good proposals out there. But I think the reality is that until we figure out who actually regulates the underlying asset, I think you're still a ways off.
Yeah, I can talk about it. Or, go ahead, Stephen. I'll let you go, and then I'll go. I'm going to talk more about the political side of why it hasn't happened yet. So Go ahead.
Yeah, and I can't really speak to that as well as you can. So I'll skip over that in my remarks. Real briefly, I feel like one of the reasons why we don't have the ETF, besides the political, is the complexity also of just setting it up. They're not as easy as you think it is, right? You have to be able to be very liquid, and when you have this tremendous volatility. On the flip side, though, why is it important? Is regular people. I keep saying regular people. I hope it doesn't sound pedantic or condescending, right? But non-crypto natives, right? That may be the way to put it, right? Want exposure to crypto now, right? And an ETF would be appealing to them. And if they're not going to have an ETF, they're going to start to think about things that the government is, more nervous about: stable coins, DeFi exchanges, et cetera, right? So I think it's in everyone's best interest to start figuring it out. But that's why it's important. It's important because more and more professional investors and more retail investors are reading about crypto, are getting educated about crypto, and want some exposure to it in their portfolio. Like more and more pension funds and endowments are putting, I think the StandardDAO is about 3% of their assets are now in crypto, right? And that was unheard of 4 or 5 years ago, right? So that's why they're important. I'll let Dina tell us why it's taken so long. I've listened to a couple of podcasts and it's fascinating. So
well, just if you don't mind, just before Dina kicks off the politics, I think it's important to let everybody know that there already is a Bitcoin ETF, right? It's based on CME futures.
Right.
Yes, but it's based on CME futures, which, by the way, closely track an index of of several different spot exchange Bitcoin settlements, and that's been developed over years by the CME, that particular index. And it's really important to note that the premium between futures and the cash markets, meaning the differential in price, futures usually have a differential in price. It's called the basis to the spot. The basis right now is about flat. So buying that Bitcoin ETF is essentially like buying Bitcoin in and of itself. There are some structural issues that is probably a little bit much for this call, but suffice to say there is an ETF out there already, and the response, quite frankly, has been lukewarm. So sorry for jumping in there, Dina, but I figured that would be a good tee up for you.
No problem at all. So, I mean, some of the things that both of you said are the reason why there's not a Bitcoin ETF. And, even Jay Clayton wouldn't approve one because of, concerns in terms of pension funds, retirement funds, and sort of you're affecting now a broader swath of people and retirement funds. So there is, as you said, there is a Bitcoin futures ETF. And, Gensler was willing to go ahead with that because it's on, I am not as good on the CFTC side, but because it's on it's on a federally regulated exchange. So when it comes to a Bitcoin ETF, it was funny. I was having a conversation with a bunch of people about this last night. let me talk a little bit about the politics on the Hill, which I spent most of my time. So there are the financial services committees, House Financial Services, and Senate Banking, and then you have that have jurisdiction almost over every single financial services issues, except CFTC, derivatives, and swaps. Then you have the agriculture committees in the House and the Senate that have jurisdiction over the CFTC. Since I come from the banking world or the banking committees, I have a bias. Like both of the chairs of the committees of the ag committees, great people. But if it were up to me, the CFTC and the SEC would be one and the same, and it would be, in the jurisdiction of the banking committees. So the reason that the CFTC has enforcement authority over the spot market. This is all spot markets, including like corn and things like that. And but they don't have full regulatory authority over the spot market. So I'm not trying to sweep the farmers in or anything like that, because they would be very concerned about being swept in and having to be regulated by the CFTC for the spot market. But to regulate the spot market takes legislation. The question is, can you get legislation done because of the tensions, not so much about partisanship, but between the committees. If you were able to get the spot market regulated for Bitcoin and Ether at a federal level for market manipulation and those types of things, then I think that Gary Gensler would be, it would kind of force his hand to approve a Bitcoin ETF or even an Ether ETF. The other thing that's interesting about all of this is, I don't know if you guys noticed that, Gary Gensler put out statements recently saying, hey, CFTC, we would really like to work with you on exchanges on cryptocurrency because we have overlapping jurisdiction and we'd love to be partners and work together. Well, again, I have a banking bias, so I don't like this, but it does create a fairly good outcome. If you took Bitcoin, which everyone has said is not a security, Gary Gensler won't admit that ETH is not a security. But if you had spot market regulation of Bitcoin and Ether, the numbers change on this daily, that would be a huge win for the CFTC, because they would be controlling about 75% of the crypto market. And then the path is cleared to the Bitcoin ETF. Now, I think it's a great solution. Obviously, altcoins get left out. I don't think, as I said, you don't bring the farmers into the whole thing. The only thing I don't like about the solution is that it does push things into the CFTC, and I have a banking committee bias. But pushing things in the CFTC allows for retail investors to be involved, and the current CFTC chair, Rostin Benham, is a very reasonable, works across the aisle, knows how to get things done.
Awesome, Dina. And I think we could do a minute for response on that. I think, Dina made some interesting points, and then we'll kind of wrap this up and we'll touch on a couple of things at the end.